This past spring, I traveled to Europe for the first time. I visited 6 different countries, and of course, one of those stops had to be Rome. When I was planning my trip, I found that the city was more expensive than most. So I developed a schedule where I could see most everything I wanted in 24 hours. I am here to share the mistakes and successes of this stopover, so you can learn and plan for your own upcoming visits. In case you're new here, I'm Tab, and this is Tab Travels. Sometimes I like to take the road less traveled, but the beaten path can be quite pretty too. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I am excited to bring you along on my journey. Let's go. My flight landed several hours delayed at midnight at the Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport. Of course, the taxi drivers were on strike. They were parked along the pickup zone, and the buses that typically shuttle visitors to the city center closes at 10 p.m. If you're traveling to Rome, I highly recommend that you arrive at an earlier hour. Many of the hotels in the city suspend check-in at 8 p.m., so it would be wise to plan your accommodations before booking your flight into the city. If you end up taking a late-night flight, like me, it would be best to lock in a driver ahead of time so you don't get caught up without a ride. Thankfully, after many failed attempts, I landed a luxury Uber for £80, and I got where I needed to go. I stayed at a flat right outside of Vatican City. I asked an Italian co-worker ahead of time what the best areas are for tourists, and she recommended the areas highlighted on screen. I woke up bright and early, and after grabbing a cappuccino and a pastry, the Vatican was my first stop. When you approach the city, you'll find a lot of tour companies offering you tickets to jump the line. Don't fall for it. These tickets are overpriced and don't always give you the access they promise. Only buy tickets from official vendors. Since we didn't want to be scammed, we waited in the standby entry line. We started our wait at 8 a.m. and stood in line for just over 3 hours, but it was worth it. When we got in the front, we were able to get 2 tickets for €40 and see some amazing works of art, including Michelangelo's most famous work, the Sixteenth Chapel. Approximately 19,000 people visit the Vatican every day, so it's best to plan ahead of time how you'll get your tickets and be prepared to wait. You can purchase tickets ahead of time, and this includes tickets with a tour guide, but I prefer to see things at my own pace. After spending 3 hours at the Vatican Museum, we were hungry for lunch. Thankfully, our host recommended a bunch of great spots nearby. I'll link these recommendations in the map below. In general, it's best not to eat at restaurants right outside of the big attractions, because they cater to tourists. We found a restaurant that felt very authentic and enjoyed pizza capricciosa, which had a hard-boiled egg on it. We then rushed off to see St. Peter's Basilica, albeit in the rain. If you want to go inside, be prepared to wait in another long line. We didn't have time to spare on this 24-hour stopover. We have to cover this landmark in another video. We relied on public transit to get in the city, which is easy to use and the most affordable option. We had to stop at the Colosseum. Again, we were only able to see it from the outside because of the long lines. Another 16,000 tourists visit the Colosseum every day, so if you're working on a limited budget or schedule, you'll probably have to choose between this site and Vatican City. The outside of the Colosseum was amazing, but because this site was so crowded, I was happy to investigate the surrounding agricultural park instead. Afterwards, we treated ourselves to some gelato, and that gave us a boost for our next stop. The Trevi fountain was an intriguing example of the Baroque style and was popularized with the 1954 film 3 Coins and a Fountain. Since this is another significant tourist stop, it can be quite tricky to get up close, but when in Rome. Afterwards, we went to the Pantheon, which was closed by the time we got there. We then rushed off to see Neptune's fountain at dusk. At this point, we were pretty tired, but we had to see the Spanish Steps before we left, and boy was that site packed with visitors as well. Rome is very crowded with tourists. At this point in the day, I was pretty exhausted, but we climbed the steps and got a nice view of the city from the top. We caught a train back to the Vatican City area, and we visited 4 restaurants that our host recommended, but not a single establishment would take us without a reservation. Maybe there was an unspoken dress code, or perhaps we arrived too late for dinner. Rome is definitely not a city you want to visit unless you have a plan. But that was a lesson well learned. A lot of the shops near our flat were also closed by the time we got there, so we went home hungry that day. I'm sure that any Italians watching this video will tear me up in the comments, but I got to see and do a lot of the things I wanted in just 24 hours. If you would be interested in seeing the restaurants our host recommended, I've linked those in the description section below. If you've stuck around to this point, please consider subscribing to my channel, liking this video, or writing a comment.